This is Life Streams, capturing our history, championing kingdom values, creating a path for future generations.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Life Streams. Today we have the pleasure of having Alan and Lisa Welch with us. They are part of our leadership team at Heritage, and they have a huge heart for our home group ministry. So we've invited them in to come and share with us the heart behind it and the why of home groups. So, Alan and Lisa, welcome. We're so thrilled to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Why don't we start by you just sharing how you even got interested in home groups?
Yeah, so that goes way back. I guess that goes back, I would say, to the 80s. My first introduction to a home group was with Jim and Peggy in homes. And that's how we really got connected. And I think probably ever since, it was a really positive experience for us. I was a kid. We were kids, I guess, when all that started. But it was a positive experience. And honestly, it's been something that I would say over the years as we've been involved in different types of home groups and small group ministry, that's kind of what we've always measured what groups were like were against our first experience. So.
Before we go any further, Alan, what did that good home group do for you in your heart? Like, did it help establish foundations in your life or?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, at the heart, I think of home group, and that's at the heart of what we're about. It's about relationships and building those relationships. And I think back, that's how I, again, was connected with Jim over all those years. And it was totally life-changing for me. And I think if it hadn't been for that home group experience, we wouldn't be here today doing what we're doing, for sure.
And it's so interesting that it started in your childhood. Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah.
So the impact of being involved with the generations in a home group, even as a child, had that kind of impact on you. I think that's really key for us.
Yeah. And now, honestly, in that moment, there were probably times I'll be like, is this going to ever be over? When I was a little kid. But yeah, I do think that was a part of it. I think just having, young kids exposed, to that instead of it being this abrupt change at some point because you're at some magical age. I think that's a really important part of home group.
How about you?
I was going to say pretty much the same thing because I was an impressionable teenager when I came into that home group, and it was all different ages. And I feel like I learned so much from that, but I always felt apart. I didn't feel that I was less than, or that somehow my opinions didn't matter as much because I was young. And so just having that was very encouraging to me as a teenager. And then also just the relationships that we formed with Jim and Peggy during that time have been life-changing for us. Obviously, here we are today because of that.
This touches on one of our core values as a congregation, and that is the whole generational aspect of every generation matters. Every generation is important. And this is a perfect example of how it should work out in our community life together.
Yeah, and I think that gets to the, part of our vision of home group. Don't want to get ahead, but part of our vision of home group is, that it's not necessarily a group of just people that are in the same phase of life as you are. Our group's a testament to that. We have families that are there with little kids, and we have, people that are, much older than us in their 80s. So, I think there's really something to be said about having that diversity in the home group. You get a lot of different perspectives when we have conversation. So, I think it's super valuable.
Why don't you just continue and share with us what are home groups even like?
Yeah, so I guess where I would start is I'll share a little bit more about our history and our experience of home group. We have experienced home group, I guess, in some capacity over 40 years, I guess, going back to that original time we just spoke of. And we've seen a lot of different iterations and a lot of different ways that would be, that home group would be conducted. I guess that first one, it was a group that met like a prayer group Bible study. One of the things, we were actually talking about that on the way over here. One of the things that was, I think, unique about that group, probably more than some of the others we've been, it was almost like an outreach group too. I mean, it was almost like an entryway into the church. People maybe that wouldn't be comfortable coming to a church service, they were, a lot more comfortable coming to a home group setting and doing that. So that's how we saw a lot of growth in that group. So that's one type of example. We've been a part of home groups where you were basically assigned to go to a group. I would say that's probably one of my least favorite. That just didn't seem to, it just wasn't organic. I mean, I get the reason behind that, wanting to make sure everybody has a place to be connected, but that wasn't really the vision that we had. Other aspects of it that are a little bit different than what our vision is for it here at Heritage Fellowship is there's a lot of thought about, having a season for those groups. So you basically have an end date. Some people use calendar year, or sometimes it follows like the school year maybe. We didn't do that because really at the heart of what home groups, our vision was for home groups, it's about that relational aspect of it. So to me, if we're saying relationships are that important, well, why would we say when we get to this point where we're just going to start all over, we're going to pick new home groups? I understand there are some positives in that. It does give people, if somebody's in a group and maybe it's just not a good fit for them, it gives them a little easier exit ramp to get out of that. But the same thing for not meeting through the summer or certain seasons. Like, we leave that up to the home group leaders. Maybe like for us, a lot of times, especially those really busy summer months, we may only meet once a month. And that's fine. We leave that up to our home group leaders to decide that. But at the core of what it's about creating that community, about creating relationships that stretch more than just seeing somebody once a week. So in our church currently, we have a team-led model in the church, and where home groups play into that is really our home group leaders are really meant to serve as I guess you would say, a pastoral capacity. Sometimes if we say that word, that may scare people off, but I think they've heard us and heard the descriptions of what that means. It doesn't mean that you have to prepare a message every home group meeting, but it just means that when there are needs, maybe it's a financial need, it's a prayer need, or any kind of physical need, whatever it is, that's kind of your conduit to how you connect to the church. You go to your home group leader, and then, I'll use the example of financial needs. Like, there's a lot of times that home groups are able to meet the financial need of that person in that situation in their group. And if it's bigger than them, then they have an opportunity. That's where they would come to us, and we would be kind of the conduit to the whole church to how do we step in as a whole congregation to help meet those needs. So that's kind of our vision for where we are.
So you've talked about the community aspect of home groups. What other dynamics are part of home groups, realizing that each group is unique? But what are the different components that we would encourage people to consider?
Yeah, so another way that our groups are set apart a little bit, the other way to do home group or small group, whatever you want to call that type of ministry, sometimes they're themed. So I know at one point I wouldn't really have called it a small group, but maybe it was. But like, I had a group that I led that we'd go hike. I mean, that was something that was themed. It was a great way to connect, and love doing that. But you don't really connect at the same level, I don't think, is what we're talking about. But I think that gets into the aspect of what our home group structure looks like. And when I say structure, I don't want to scare people off. It's not this real rigid structure, but I think at the core of this, really in Acts, it talks about in the beginning, in the early church, there were really 4 essential activities, I guess, if you will, that home groups or the home church had. And it was fellowship, it was communion and having a meal together, it was reading a scripture and prayer, those 4 things. So that's kind of at the core of what we talk to our leaders about, that we want that to be a part of. So again, every time we meet, maybe you don't have all those elements in place, but that's kind of the framework for what we see home groups being.
Also, I was going to say that one thing that we do encourage our leaders to do is to go back and talk about what was mentioned and what was taught on Sunday during our church service. We don't ask them to prepare Bible study or do something like that, but we really want that time to be where we get together and say, okay, what did you get from the message on Sunday, and how are you going to apply that in your life? Home group setting is a great way to get down to that application as to what it means for us personally from what we read, what we heard on Sundays.
One final thing I want to bring up, just as we talk about home groups and our vision for home groups, I feel like not only in our culture here in America, but also in our church culture, and this is something I've talked about before, there's this whole concept of pseudo community. And I think it was Bonhoeffer that talked about pseudo community. I believe that's who it was. And it's this thing of where we feel like we're in community, and it's real easy to do that as long as everything's going smooth, there's no problems, or it's not tough. But as soon as it gets messy, all of a sudden we're out. And I think that's, again, part of our vision of why we want these groups to continue, not necessarily to have an end date, but, it's just life. I mean, there's good times and there's bad times, and how do we help when people are, when they're struggling or when things are going well? That's what real community is about, whether it's going well or not. That speaks to the thing about not just the longevity, of a group, but I know for us in the group that we have now, we've been meeting, 2 years. And obviously there's been changes within the group. We've added new people to the group. And some people have moved or gone to other groups maybe, but it took a long time, to start. I would say probably a year in the beginning, just to get people to open up and comfortable to that. Because it is I think it's new to a lot of people. If you didn't grow up like we did from the time you were a child being in a home group setting, it takes a little while to get to know people and be vulnerable. But we've just seen, we've had some incredible times of prayer in our group, and just people being really vulnerable in their group. And the other thing is how you get to celebrate with people too. It's not just about meeting needs, because I think about some of the things that we've got to celebrate with people. Like we've walked through with people in our group that were in the midst of fostering and adopting kids. And there was, one particular example, it didn't seem like there was any hope. For this particular little boy, and we had prayer one night, and there was no hope for him even coming back to the home. And that particular night, our whole group, we prayed. And that week, just out of nowhere, God opened doors that who would have ever imagined. And, now that child's been adopted, but we got to celebrate in that together. So that's the other thing about that community. It's not just always going through the really hard times, but you get to go through the good times with people too.
That's a great testimony. Alan and Lisa, what other challenges? You just mentioned that sometimes it takes a while for people to open up. We have found that in our group as well. We've pushed through that point, but it just takes people different experiences to feel safe. Are there any other things that you have encountered or that the other groups have encountered that would help for us to unpack a little bit?
I would say one of the things that's been a little bit of a challenge has been just meeting consistently. Lives are busy. Leaders are busy. I know for us, we've come out of some busy seasons, and we do find that consistent meeting together is important. We do ask for twice a month. That I think most groups do that. I don't know, maybe in an ideal world, once a week would be really awesome, but it is hard to get the same people there every time. So sometimes, when you've just gotten somebody's really had a breakthrough, and then they're not there for a couple of weeks, and then someone else comes in, it's just a little bit hard for the flow and the consistency of that. So that's a challenge.
Well, there's a couple I think of. One, I think about just group size. We currently in our church, we have about 200 people involved in home group, and we have 13 home groups currently. So some of the groups are larger than the others, and that can get to be an issue, not just so much because of space, but I know we've had times at our house, we've had almost 30 people there. And the problem is it really, I think it loses the small group feel, and especially if early on, if you've not established those relationships, or maybe you have a group that's well established and there's a new family that comes into that group. If that happens, it's a little more difficult for people to open up in that situation. So I would say that's probably one of the hurdles. So we've not had a lack of leaders in the sense of having a place for people that wanted to be in a home group. But it would be really nice if we had double the amount of home group leaders to have double the amount of groups, just so that group size is smaller.
In an ideal world, our vision would be a home group would be 6 to 8 people sitting around a table, having a meal together, praying for one another, doing the things the early church did in that small setting. It'll take a while to get there.
So, Lord, send more leaders.
That's right.
Raise up more leaders.
And I will say that, like, there have been times where our group sizes has been that.
Yes.
And we've been able to sit around the table, just like there's been times there's been 30 people there. But I would say in those times when that group is smaller, 8 to 10 people, that it's much easier to get into a conversation. And I love the concept of sitting around a table. I don't have a table that'll seat 30, but I think that concept of sitting around the table, it just relaxes people more. I don't think it was any accident that that's one of the things in Acts that the early church did. So yeah, but that's we kind of came off that a little bit. Like, we can't be too idealistic in what we want and what we envisioned home group being, but that would be our ultimate vision.
So taking this a step further, then, how do you raise up more leaders? What do you have a training process? Is it learned by osmosis with people just being in the groups? And how do you determine when someone's ready to be a leader?
Yeah, I think that would probably be I would say that's probably my biggest challenge. Just having, I don't know, I know we don't have an official training.
There's no manual.
There's no manual. There's no training process. We don't have, sign up for this course and in 6 weeks you'll be the best home group leader ever. We don't have that. But just recently we added a new couple. It's been coming to our church probably about a year or so. We just added them as home group leaders. And one of the things we did with them, when he had heard that they were expressing an interest in doing that, and another couple in our church, another one of the elders that was in the home group with them said, hey, I think they'd be really good people to start a new group. So Lisa and I had dinner with them. We went and had dinner with them, their kids, and just sat down and we talked about, really shared what our vision for home group is, to make sure we're all on the same page. The other thing that we do is we meet quarterly. Our last meeting was in person. Sometimes we'll do a Zoom call, and that went really well the last time we did the Zoom call too. But we've had really good attendance at those meetings. I think almost every leader has been at every one of those quarterly meetings. And really what we do in that meeting is we try to share practical things that we've heard from other leaders or have them share in that setting. And we just keep reiterating that vision of what this is to be about. I think, now we're moving into year 3 of doing this. And I think that's one of the things of how do we keep it fresh, and how do we make sure people stay focused on what our vision is, and we don't divert from that and get, into all these other areas that a group could go. Mm-hmm. So, because our vision for it is not, we mentioned fellowship and a meal. That's an important part, but, it's not a supper club. And that's part of, food is a part of most of the groups, and it may be chips and salsa, or it may be a full meal. It just depends. The groups have the flexibility to do that. Everybody kind of shares in bringing food to the groups. But I think it's just keeping that intentionality about, especially about continuing those conversations of what we are as a body that we're being taught and what we're hearing every week. So it's not just that we come and sit down in church on Sunday and we hear it. We have another avenue to be able to talk about that as a group, ask questions, and share our thoughts about that.
So I hear a real integrating of our Sunday corporate gatherings and what we try to accomplish in our home groups, so that we're actually applying what we've heard on Sunday and grappling with it and wrestling with it. and learning from it as we can discuss in the small group together.
That is definitely the vision, and that's the hope, and that's what we keep emphasizing. I would mention, I guess it was a year and a half, 2 years ago now, when Pastor Samuel was here, and he stayed with us, and it was such an impactful time, and him sharing about how home groups worked there in Africa, and it's a little bit different the way they're more geographical because of the limited travel. Ours aren't that, but I remember him talking about how even the elders of the church routinely visiting those groups to make sure that they're staying on vision, that they're talking about those things that are happening. And that really was impactful to us because that was our vision too. It just really solidified what we were already feeling about that.
And I love that all of our leadership team are involved in the home groups. They're not on the outside watching it happen, but they actually are participating, and probably most of them leading.
Most of them do.
Themselves. That's wonderful. Are there any other areas that would help us to have you unpack a little bit as far as struggles?
One of our struggles has been childcare. I know we talked about how we came into home groups as children, but we weren't, infants and toddlers. So that is an issue. Some of our groups have a lot of children. They're made up of mostly young families. So that is a challenge for every group. It's been met in different ways. Sometimes parents just take turns and will take the kids to another room and kind of be there just for the discussion part of the night. Also, we do have a young lady has come into there and will watch the children and will get paid for that. So that's been a great way for one of our groups, especially because they have so many children. But I would say that has been a particular challenge, having children come into your home who have never been there before and don't always know exactly what to do, what not to do. And so that has been a particularly fun challenge in some evenings, but that is something we are working to try to help our leaders out with.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think the thing about that too is not that it's just distracting to the group. I don't know that that's even the biggest issue, but it's even for those parents of small kids. They need an opportunity to be able to talk about this. And if they're just, so worried about having to deal with their kids, that can be a big distraction for them. So they don't really get to take away from the meeting what we would hope they would get to take away.
And I know some of the groups really have a lot of families. We have no littles in our group right now. We have in the past, but we don't right now. So each group is going to look different. Mm-hmm. The makeup is going to look different, and the solutions for each of these challenges are going to be unique to the group.
Absolutely.
So there's freedom to explore that together. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that's exactly it.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Alan and Lisa, is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we wrap up? This has been so rich.
Well, I think just the last thing I would share is out of Matthew 22:37. I go to that. It's funny, I was talking about this week, we were talking about this at home. I said, I feel like every time I prepare a message, to teach or something, I feel like every one of them could end with Matthew 22:37. But it's Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And second, and equally important, is love your neighbor as yourself. And that, to me, it should be central to what we're doing as a church, period, I would say, both church locally and church globally. But I think that's really at the core of what home groups is about too. Like with us trying to, as we get into scripture, as we pray, as we study about what we're learning and talking about on Sundays, helping us to love the Lord more. Well, the way that's exemplified is if we're loving our neighbors ourselves. And I think home group is one of the best ways possible to do that.
That's great.
And I did have one more scripture I would like to share. It's from Hebrews 10. And this is from a paraphrase from the Passion Translation, but I just love the way it says it. So now wrap your heart tightly around the hope that lives within us, knowing that God always keeps his promises. Discover creative ways to encourage others and to motivate them towards acts of compassion, doing beautiful works as expressions of love. This is not the time to pull away and neglect meeting together as some have formed the habit of doing. In fact, we should come together even more frequently, eager to encourage and urge each other onward as we anticipate that day dawning. And I love that, doing beautiful works of expressions of love for one another. And I think that is at the heart of what we see our home groups being.
Alan and Lisa, this has been so rich. Thank you for sharing with us. And I trust that as you continue to give leadership to this movement, it'll just multiply. The fruit will multiply through each of the groups and the way that they're investing in one another. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I hope that you've heard Alan and Lisa's heart. I was reflecting as they were sharing on the mission statement of our congregation at Heritage. The first two parts of that statement is encounter God and love people. And I hope you've heard that that is what's happening in our home groups. We come together, we love each other with the goal of encountering God together. So this is a beautiful, practical outworking, an expression of how we can live out the mandate of the gospel. We trust this has been a blessing for you to hear about how we are growing at Heritage with our home group ministry. It's been vital. It's actually really been one of the primary lifelines of our congregation in the last years. So we bless you. We trust that you'll be encouraged through this and take up the challenge to create home groups in your own congregation. God bless.
This is Life Streams. If you've enjoyed today's session, be sure to like, comment, and share. And of course, you'll want to hit the subscribe button so you never miss a new episode. And would you consider becoming a part of the Life Streams community to enable us to continue doing what we do? It's as easy as clicking on the donate link below. Thank you for joining us.